So thank you. Thank you. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's so wonderful to have you here on Quad Education's webinar. Before we get started, there's just a sort of few housekeeping rules, for lack of a better word. Would love for everyone to know that this webinar is recorded and you will receive a recording in your email within the next couple of days. We're looking at running tonight's session for about 45 minutes, half an hour or so of content, and ideally 15 minutes of Q&A. But of course, we'll see how everything goes tonight. We would love for you to put your questions in the chat or in the Q&A, and we'll make sure to get back to them at the end of the presentation. Other than that, thank you again for joining us. Just before I move on to our expert panelists, I'd love to pop in and share a little bit about who we are at Quad and what we offer. So Quad Education is a globally recognized college admissions consulting firm with the largest team of admissions counselors in the world. With a 98% success rate, our students are 11 times more likely to get accepted at their top choice colleges. We assist students from 6th grade to undergraduate transfer candidates in applying to their dream schools. We are firm believers in starting the college application process as early as possible. For our middle schoolers and early high schoolers, we offer college candidacy and profile development. This process focuses on building each student's resume to highlight their strengths. We want the candidate to stand out, so we will work with our student to identify clubs and leadership positions, find extracurricular activities and volunteer opportunities, and assist in creating next year's class schedule. Our college development program extends outside of the classroom as well as the regular school year. Since schools are looking at more than academics these days, our counselors also help plan summer activities. These include summer courses, internships, shadowing, research opportunities, and giving back to the community through encouraging students to create service projects. Once we've helped shape an outstanding candidate, we extend our support in shaping the perfect application. We're here to help with comprehensive application support, from picking the right major to building a balanced list of activities, obtaining letters of recommendation, interview preparation, and applying to scholarships. Our admissions counselors are also essay writing experts who will brainstorm, outline, and edit your supplemental essays and personal statements until they are perfect. These essays serve as platforms to showcase all the best aspects of our students, drawing connections between their individual life journeys and the overarching themes of each school they apply to. Whether it's your main application or those extra essays for scholarships, we've got your back with unlimited essays. Or I should say unlimited edits for those essays. Overall, our goal is to build the perfect candidate and the perfect application. We utilize every tool in our skill set to ensure that the products we create with our students stand out from the rest of the pack. If you're interested in learning more about us and our packages, we offer personalized free consultations via video, phone, or email, ensuring that individualized one-on-one support. Our admissions counselors are always ready and willing to help you through the process, so you don't have to navigate it alone, no matter where you are in the application process. With that being said, I'd love to turn it over to two of our wonderful experts, Varna and Nick, to introduce themselves.
Right, I can start. My name is Varna. I am a current third-year medical student in the Chicagoland area. I went to University of Michigan for undergrad, where I studied English and molecular biology, and then I went on to Columbia University to get my Master of Public Health in Health Policy and Healthcare Management. So I've been with Quad for about a year and a half, 2 years now, working with a diversity of students, some that are more longitudinal and some that are like ready, starting to apply for college. So I'm excited to share with all of you what I know.
Thanks, Varna. And I'm Nick Havey. I'm the Director of Institutional Research at the American Association of Colleges of Nursing during the day. And I've been with Quad just under a year. I did my undergraduate and a master's at the University of Arizona, and then another master's and a PhD at UCLA. And similar to Varna, the students that I work with are predominantly sort of in the ready to apply stage, but I also work with a few younger students for early candidacy development.
Thank you both. So just a little bit of an agenda for our wonderful audience tonight. So we'll be speaking about understanding your goals and needs, factors to consider as you build a customized list, ensuring your list is balanced, how to build your school list, those tips to narrow down your options, and of course that Q&A that we mentioned. With that being said, I'll turn it over to our panelists from here on forth.
Perfect. Thanks, Andrea. Varna, would you like to start?
Sure. All right. So one of the biggest things that we talk about when it comes to selecting the right college for you is what are you looking for in terms of like, what are your non-negotiables, right? So like, do you thrive more so in like smaller classroom sizes where there's, 15 students to like one professor, or are you thriving more so in like a larger classroom environment? So for example, state schools, like I went to a state school and like in my freshman and sophomore year classes, sometimes there was 400 of us in a room to a professor. So really thinking critically about like, is that an environment that you can learn well, learn best? Also just like campus setting, are you looking for an institution that's, spread out throughout the city, for example, like NYU, or are you looking for a campus that is like enclosed and like has its own like community right there? So those are like a couple of things that are like really important to kind of start reflecting on as you're creating your list.
And just to add on that, even thinking further along the lines of really specific things to you. So for instance, I went to a state school as well. I lived on campus in a residence hall, and that was a very good, excellent experience. Research shows that students that live at the institution that I attended, students that live on campus tend to have higher GPAs, graduate better, and have better job placement outcomes. But not every school has residence halls or dorms. Not every school has opportunities to live on campus. So that's important, if that's important to you. And then just even lighter stuff to think about, like I'm from Arizona, good Mexican food is important to me. I didn't want to go anywhere that didn't have good Mexican food because I will crave a burrito and be sad if it's not available. So yeah, just kind of starting with that checklist, like Varna said, and crossing things off will help you eliminate a lot of options relatively quickly. So moving on, you also got to think about your principles and your values. Again, those non-negotiables in your education journey, things like diversity, sustainability, innovation, core beliefs. If you're not religious, you might not want to attend a school with a strict religious code. If you are religious, you might be interested in a more denominational institution. And then again, just to hammer home, do the personal reflection early on to ask yourself the questions, and parents as well. Talk to your kids about finances and what's realistic. Talk about if you, like Varna and I, want to also pursue graduate education, maybe you compromise or you make a different choice in your undergraduate career. And then just again, thinking about subjects activities. I have a student who is very interested in theater, but he is also an engineering major. And so he wanted to attend somewhere that had a robust theater program that did not require him to be a theater major to still participate in. So just knowing yourself and knowing your student is a great place to start.
And Nick brings up a really good point about that too. Like if you're looking to kind of explore multiple interests, like for example, theater and something more STEM oriented, make sure that the curriculum like kind of allows you to do that, whether that's through a minor or a double major or just like being able to like be dual enrolled. Because if that's important to you, it's really important that like you're investing this time and money into an institution. You want to make sure you're getting what you want out of it. All right, this kind of goes perfectly into the next parts here. So the academic and extracurricular considerations. So another thing to bring up, for example, let's say you're interested in the STEM field and you're really looking to like dabble in research, right? There are some institutions where it's very well known that like, as early as freshman year, first semester, you can, get involved and like, there's a lot of opportunities. In some places, maybe if it's more of a liberal arts education emphasis, it might not be quite as abundant and available, or maybe it's, only if you have prior experience, you really are able to get in early. So really kind of some of that also comes from, if you know someone that went to a school that you're interested in, talk to them, right? The best way to learn about a school is to talk to someone that actually goes there. And if they're, also studying what you want to study, even better, right? So definitely talk to whoever you can. You can also always reach out to the admissions of that institution and be like, hey, I'd love to be connected with the student. There's always student ambassadors and like students that are also involved in admissions that you can chat with. So highly, highly recommend doing that. In terms of extracurriculars, even just, this is the time where you're going to grow so much. So it's really important to know that, okay, like maybe this institution is located within a community that like I really want to get involved in, or maybe this is, they have, X, Y, and Z volunteer opportunities or student organizations that really resonate with you or really align with your values. That is really, really important. Like, it's always great to go somewhere and start something, but like if it's already existing there, even better, right? So that's definitely something to take into consideration.
And to reiterate what Varna just said, it's also important to, when you're doing this sort of homework, the preschool list, you want to avoid talking about things that already exist as if they don't exist. So for instance, I have had several conversations where an activity, let's say a Chinese student, organization exists at the high school, and they say, I want to, start the chapter at this college campus. Well, there already was a chapter, and it's, been active for 30 years. So knowing that information will really help you to shape your statements and shape what you're wanting to talk about. But it's also going to help you create your list and narrow down that list, because you might say, I've been doing this, volunteer opportunity for 8 years, and I want to continue on my college campus. If it doesn't exist where you're looking, and that's something that's important to you, you'll want to do that. And then just while we're on this page, considering factors such as faculty expertise and research opportunities, one great thing to do, which I really recommend for more graduate students and people applying for professional programs, is to look and think about the actual faculty members in the programs that you're considering. Because if you're, let's say, Varna's a medical student, let's say you're super interested in medical research on, a particular skin condition that you have, or, some other thing, and a faculty member is the leading expert in that thing, you might want to know that and maybe try to go there so that you can be mentored by them or take a class with them or just expand your options. And again, we'll talk about this throughout, but I really try to hammer home the idea of specificity and knowing why you're interested in a place, because it's easy to say, I went to UCLA. It's easy to say, well, I want to go to UCLA because it's beautiful and I love Southern California weather and I want to be close to the beach. That is not a compelling reason for UCLA admissions officers on why to attend. So, perfect. So, and then just continuing on, we kind of already touched on a lot of these things, but campus atmosphere and diversity, again, we went to 2 state schools that were both a little bit more like, the school is the city that you live in. And that can be off-putting to some people. You might want to go downtown and not see your TAs and all your peers, or you might want that. Similarly, like, I would like to be close to an Asian grocery store. So there are a lot of schools in the country where that's not an option. And also considering resources and support services early. If your student has a disability, a really strong disability resource center is a great thing to look for, because you don't want to spend, your first year really fighting for accommodations if there's not a great track record at that institution. And Varna touched on this. I was a happy clapping backwards walking tour guide when I was an undergrad. Don't be afraid to schedule a tour, either of campus or of a particular residence hall, because that's a really great way to get a feel for the actual campus, see students living. And then this is another pro tip that we'll talk about later, but one way to really get a feel for campus is to read the student newspaper. I was a student journalist when I was in college, and the best way to learn about some things that are happening on campus that maybe the school isn't excited about, or maybe they are excited about, is the student newspaper. If there's something like a president who's on their way out, and what does that mean for future students? If there are conversations with the Board of Regents or the Board of Visitors in that state about changing tuition, the current students are the ones that are going to tell you that information the fastest and in the most clear way. But you'll also learn about cool things that are happening, coverage of sports and art and all that stuff that might not come up on the brochures. So always a great place to check out.
Absolutely. And I think we've been kind of touching upon all this as we go, but in terms of alignment, right? Like, I think it's really important. I think it brings up a really good point. I did this like in every step of my application processes, but like I always identify like a mentor or multiple mentors or people that are doing things that like I'm like, oh, I want to know more about that. Or how did they get to that point of doing that? And I kid you not, I have done that every single time, and I've always ended up working with that person once I do, matriculate. And so I think that is really, really important because, as I said before, yeah, it's great to be the first one to do something, but like so much better when you have someone that can pave a path for you, right? I think it's also really, really important in terms of diversity, right? If you like being very much reflective of like, okay, what parts of your identity are very important to you? Like for me, I'm a South Asian woman, so it's really important for me to see other South Asian women that are becoming physicians or becoming like, faculty. Like that was really important for me to see that, okay, it is possible for me to also get there because there's someone doing this, right? Like that makes a huge difference. Research really shows that like it is the greatest determinant in terms of attrition out of school, right? Is whether or not they feel like they've seen a model that looks like them, has experiences like them, a background like them. So that's really, really important to take a look at the diversity of the school that you might attend. In terms of looking at advanced study, right? So really looking at what is the advising like in that institution is also really important. I think that advising comes in many forms, right? So one can be a mentor, right? That you identify as one of your professors that you really just connect with during office hours. That's great. Or it can be even like the advising center within the institution, right? I've had like two very different experiences where like in my state school, I didn't feel like I had a great like advising center per se, but I found amazing mentors, right? And so that like was totally fine. I was able to get the guidance that I needed to like apply for higher education. But then when I was in graduate school, for example, like which was a smaller environment, I had like some of the best advising from the like academic resource center. They would edit my personal statements for medical school, like all that kind of stuff. So very, very supportive. So definitely asking students and even alumni, I think is a really, really great resource to tap into of like, hey, like what was your experience with like advising at that school, or were you able to find a mentor, or were they very inaccessible? So I think that's really, really important. The other thing that I just want to touch upon, just because I'm remembering it now, also just asking about like post-graduation success, right? So like if you're able to ask them like, okay, like how many of your students like from this major went on to do this career, right? Or how many people went on to go to this graduate school type of program? Very, very important to know. And that way, that, hey, like maybe I can connect with that alumni in the future and like, connect with this person, learn more about the work that they're doing, or even, and this even goes for, I know I'm talking from more of a STEM perspective, but this even goes for like business, right? Like business is all about networking. So like if that school has a strong alumni network, huge bonus for sure.
And that what Varna, I was going to say the exact same thing. That also works in the reverse. So if you are interested in a particular job or job type or company, you can go on LinkedIn and look at the people that have the jobs that you you or your student wants to have in 15 years and backtrack and say, it looks like 75% of the people that are doing this role or work at this company in the role that I want attended 2 schools. Maybe I should go there. And you can do the same thing for research in any field. So I know in my field, which is higher education and nursing education, the authorship of research across the field, almost everyone, something around 90 to 95%, were educated in the same 4 graduate programs. So that tells you something about those graduate programs and the students that they're producing and the career outcomes that they are having. And so, yeah, especially if you're thinking about further education, knowing what schools have things like a 4+1, so 4 years of undergrad plus 1 year of master's, accelerated programs. There are plenty of medical schools in the country that have early admission where you apply basically to medical school before you're in regular college and you just get launched right in. So just knowing all of that and exploring all that, and then also asking yourself, again, to return to those introspective questions, what's going to be good for you? Like if you or your student needs to, have significantly more support when it comes to tutoring or executive functioning, knowing what schools have robust and accessible tutoring centers, strategic alternative learning centers. These are great things to look for because not everyone is going to thrive in the, 50,000 student state school population, but some people might feel a little bit stressed out by some of the schools that have 1,100 students. So just knowing yourself and really covering as many bases as you can on that initial checklist is so important. All right, so now we're going to move into talking specifically about factors to consider as you build a customized list. I know that we have really covered a lot of content so far, so if anyone has any questions or lingering questions that you want to pop into the chat, we're happy to take a look and try to think about them as we're covering them. But without further ado, we talked about this. We will continue to talk about it. Location and environment is probably the most important, starting point. It's really where you should start thinking. Obviously, where you currently live is probably going to be a huge determining factor in the school choices that you make. If you, for instance, I live in DC, my parents live in Arizona, I currently wouldn't make the choice to live a very expensive plane ride home away, but you might want to. So just thinking about where you've been, where you want to be, and I also think it's important to consider the support structures. So for graduate school for me, I had family that lived in LA, and so it wasn't a hard transition to that space. It might be a hard transition for your student if they've never lived away from home and all of a sudden they're 1,200 miles away and a 4-hour flight. So just considering all those things. Anything to add?
No, I think that perfectly summarizes it. Yeah. Yeah, as for the academics, obviously this is why you're either going or sending your child, right, to college. Super important to so that there's two parts to this. There's one part is that most schools across the board will typically have like a major that you're looking for, right? So I say this because, if you don't get into your whatever your dream school is or whatever, that doesn't mean that's the only school you can study that in. So I want that to be very clear from the start. But on top of that, I do think that it's really, really important to, like I mentioned before, if you're like interested in like also doing a minor in something or a double major in something, or you want to like study abroad or like whatever it is that like really like, gets you excited to get up in the morning, like that's the kind of stuff that you want to be doing, right? It's really important to make sure that like that school will allow you to do that, because it's and that takes a little bit more than just looking at the majors. It also, you have to look at like the curriculum, right? So like some schools have a ton of like general ed requirements and all this stuff that will fill up a lot of your time, and you might not be able to fit in like a minor or like that study abroad program you really want to do because you have to like fit in all these other credits, right? The other thing that you also might want to consider is, okay, like some of these schools have like honors programs, or they have like communities and like things like that, that maybe, that's your way of, if you're going to go to a big state school, to find like a smaller community, right? Not every school will have that. I know like Michigan had that, where they had little, I forget exactly what they were called, but they were like education communities, like based on like different areas of study. They also had them like grouped based on like different interests, like sports and things like that. So if that is really important to you in terms of finding your community, make sure that exists there. So I think that's really huge. I think that's kind of all I had to say about that. If you have anything else to add, Nick, go ahead.
Yeah, just some places don't have certain majors that you think would be normal because they have decided to close those programs or whatever. And there are a handful of programs across the country that are incredibly restrictive when it comes to what you're allowed to take. Mm-hmm. So if you, to Varna's point, are, let's say, really interested in both chemical engineering and dance, well, the chemical engineering department might not let you take dance classes, and you should know that before you select that school. The other thing that I want to add to Varna's comment about living learning communities, so those sort of themed communities of, let's say, again, students that are really interested in social activism or engineering or dance, pick whatever your interest is. There is almost certainly a floor in a residence hall that caters to that thing. Two really great points for thinking about those early is that oftentimes the most sought after residence halls will have a living learning community, and your chances of getting into the residence hall that you want are much higher if you are locked into that living learning community, because they have to slot those spaces for students that are interested in those things. But again, to our earlier points about future orientation, that's where you're going to get early access to faculty members, when you're going to get early access to research opportunities, internships, networking events. So just knowing that those things exist and sort of building your list around that is a lot better than finding out as a happy little surprise. So again, I think we've really touched on campus culture and community, but it's important to think about college as more than just class. It's going to be so much more. As Varna explained earlier, sense of belonging is a key determinant in both social and academic success within college. Students that feel happy on their college campuses are much more likely to succeed, and there is so much research demonstrating that that's true. But the other thing is you're going to spend a lot of time on your college campus that's not in class, and so finding things to do and that you enjoy is super important. And so again, just knowing if you are in, let's say, a Bollywood dance group, or you would love to join like a show choir or something, again, spin the wheel of random activities. And if one of them is your thing that you need to have, make sure that your schools have it, because you can't always start a club, but it is nice to come into a situation where they have 20 years and funding from the school.
Mm-hmm.
So, and read the student newspaper. It's very, very informative.
And honestly, that is such a great pro tip, even for when you're like writing your application essays, right? To like I recommend this to the students I work with all the time, is like, go and look at what's written in the student newspaper, and like, you can talk about that stuff. Like, hey, like I saw this was happening and that like aligns with what I'm interested in. And like, that's why I want to go here, right? That's a way to make your personal statement a little bit more unique, of like, not just your personal statement, but the school specific essays specifically. So just a quick little add on there. In terms of reputation rankings, right? So I think it's really important to take a look at, before, like, this should not be the first thing on your list, right? Like, first go through kind of everything that we've talked about in terms of, what do I need to succeed? What is important to me? What do I really value in my educational experience? Because 4 years is a long time, right? You're making a pretty big commitment, probably the biggest commitment that you've ever made. And it's a pretty big financial commitment too, right? So it's really important to have those aspects in line first, and then look at, okay, when I look at myself, not just on paper, but like as a whole person, as a holistic person, where will I thrive best? And which of these schools also meet my needs, right? So really, like, I don't love the word fit. I always try to think of it as more so of like a partnership, in a way of like, okay, like, here's what I bring to the table, and like, is this school going to recognize what I bring to the table? And if so, then yeah, like, then this is a good fit, right? But I think it's important to not let like the reputation, the ranking guide your decision making. It should be the other way around, where like you have everything else in place, and then you're like, okay, like, what about the school, like, gives it the wow factor, right? Are they super well known for like the STEM programs, or are they super well known for theater, right? Yeah, then that's probably something that you should like kind of bump up in your list. But don't just solely, go on like the US News, like, top 25, and like, all right, 1, 2, 3, I'm gonna go apply to those. That isn't a strategy that's gonna work well, and it's gonna show in your essays, right? That like,
right.
You didn't really look into the school and figure out what about that school resonates with you. And that is something that like admissions counselors will know. Like, they will listen to your essay and they will know that, okay, like this student just did a quick little Google search, saw that, we're great at this, and like decided to apply. But yeah, that's kind of all I had to say about that.
Yeah, I was going to say that exact same thing about your statements, just like applying for a job. Which I realize most high school students maybe haven't written cover letters. Employers can tell from a cover letter if you actually want the job, or if you're sort of shotgun applying to everything, because you'll make it clear that you're a good fit and they are a good fit for you. College is the same thing. I'm going to try to not soapbox about this. Unfortunately, my research is in higher education. U.S. News and World Report rankings are also sort of a black box pay-to-play system, where a lot of the factors that go into a particular ranking are also wildly irrelevant to undergraduate experience. For instance, one of the key drivers of a school's ranking is research funding, federal and private. And that might not matter to you at all, or affect your experience at all. And so, rankings can really tell a different story depending on what they are and what they say. So just, again, starting with that introspection and thinking about why something is a good fit for you is going to make every step of the application process better. And it also should hopefully, I think this has been true with my students and maybe with yours as well too, Varna, doing this good, hard work to do this introspection is a great buffer to being upset if you don't get in somewhere. Because if you've done the work to say, actually, you know, let's keep it on my list, but it might not be the perfect fit for me. If it ends up not being a fit because you don't get in, it will be less painful because you know, well, it didn't check all of my boxes. And I see a few questions in the chat about, you know, researching and starting to build that initial list, and that's where we're headed. So we'll just keep on trucking. So balance.
Right. Yeah, so creating a balanced list, right? Okay, so I honestly, like, I try to stay away from the word safety, but it is like no school is truly a safety school, right? In the sense that, like, at the end of the day, like, we always see kids that, like, oh, like, they should have definitely gone in there, and maybe they didn't, right? And then there's also students who are like, oh, like, this might be a reach, and they get in, right? So but it's more so for you to kind of gauge, like, am I being realistic with my list, right? So really thinking about if you just distill it down, even though we're trying to focus on keeping you well-rounded, right? When you're applying, we want you to be well-rounded in terms of, okay, not only are you great at school and doing well in your standardized exams, but you also have these other dimensions to you where you do this extracurricular activity that really fills up your cup and you're really passionate about it and you want to continue doing that in college. And so it's really important to create like a list of schools that you're like, okay, like these ones seem to really be in my safety category. These ones like match, right? That's kind of what I was explaining before, like a partnership, right? Like these ones are the ones that I'm right on target, right? And then the reach schools are the ones that, maybe you don't necessarily have like the mean GPA of what they accept or whatever, but there's other aspects to your application that could make you a really strong fit there and you could really thrive there, right? Because once again, I want to stay away, this goes for both the parents and the students, like stay away from distilling yourself to like your SAT score and like your GPA. Because they're not looking at just that, right? Like what's the point of submitting a whole application if that's all they're going to care about? That's not true, right? But that being said, I do think it's important to kind of space it out in terms of like, if your GPA is, very far off from the mean, then maybe that's not a safety, right? Because that is one factor, but that doesn't necessarily count you out. So put that in your match to reach ratio, right? So really just making sure you have like balance in that sense. Diversity of school type, right? So that's kind of everything we've talked about, state versus private, large versus small, geographic location also, right? So geographic diversity. So really touching upon, and this also requires a lot of open communication between the parents and the student, right? Because obviously parents, I'm sure you want your kids to stay as close to home as possible, but maybe what the student needs to grow is to be a plane ride away and to really have to like figure out life for themselves. I know that's what it was for me. Like I am very, very close to my family, and it was a very big step for me to go like halfway across the country and be a flight away from your family. And I, had to learn to like do all these things on my own. And like, it was very instrumental in the person that I am today, right? And that's what you really want to happen when they graduate college, right? To have that growth, that learning experience. And then in terms of different program strengths and sizes, I think I kind of just touched upon that, but really focusing on diversity and not just like, okay, all these schools, they have engineering programs, like that's what I'm going to apply for, right? Really looking at like all around the same way that they're evaluating you, you want to be evaluating them.
Right. Just to add with respect to sort of the first bullet, I always say with my students, once you are above a certain threshold of GPA and test scores, it is truly all about making the case that where you are applying is a good fit for you, and here's why. Because I'm an alumni of UCLA, I do student interviews. There are thousands of applicants every year who on paper look exactly the same. And because they haven't spent time cultivating, a profile and sort of an interest statement, they talk about everything that's clear from their resumes and their transcripts. And so as a result, they blur with everyone else who had a 4.0 and everyone else who got a 35 on the ACT. So really getting to the point where the schools are a logical choice and you fit metrically. The other thing to consider too is with diversity in school types is the difference between a R1, a research intensive university, and an R2 or an R3. If you are not super interested in research and you are not super interested in graduate education, you might be much happier at a comprehensive state school that has significantly more advising and more teaching capacity than a school like UCLA or Stanford, where the majority of the faculty members are devoting the bulk of their time to research. So just considering those things. And then I had one other point, but I can't remember it. So it'll sort of resurface.
I'll come to you.
Okay. All right, and now we're going to talk about how to build your school list.
Mm-hmm.
So step one, building a list that includes every option. So you can start with a lot of schools. And I think this is really kind of consistent in my experience of most students have about 20 to 25, maybe 15 to 20 of schools that maybe are more sort of like those name brands, or they are the schools that are close to you. So, you know, if you live in Los Angeles, you can throw a rock and hit 500 college campuses. But if you live in a, you know, weird part of Arizona, you have to drive 200 miles to the nearest college campus. And so just making that bulk list is where you want to start. And then again, circling back to everything that we talked about, geography, maybe you want to drive, maybe you want to live at home, you know, major type, maybe not everything has the majors that you're interested in. Step two, make sure that list reflects your wants and needs. So you can start to pare it down again by doing everything that we've talked about, talking to resources at the school, trying to find other students. Maybe you have, as students, maybe you have an older friend that goes there or applied or did a tour. You know, talk to neighbors, talk to family friends, talk to, you know, relatives. And then really try to make that list of those bullet points of, you know, maybe for instance, you would love to be in Greek life. Pick schools that have Greek life. Maybe circling back to one of my examples, you would like there to be a theater program. You want there to be intramural sports. Maybe the college recreation gym is really important to you. Find a college that has a good gym. Not every college does. Mm-hmm. The UCLA gym hasn't been renovated since 1965. And then narrow it down because, and I think I can speak for both of us, Varna, you don't want to apply to 20 colleges. Yeah. So really try to pare things down so that you have a manageable list when it comes time, you know, in the rough part of the end of high school to start writing 4 to 5 essays per college and put it in getting rec letters, and all the other work that happens after the college list is going to be so much easier if you have a very intentional and curated list of places that you're applying to.
Yeah, no, that's a really important point because I think it's very easy to underestimate how big of a workload it is for each school that you add on in terms of the school specific essays. And like, it's not going to work great if your plan is just churn out like very generic essays for every school, right? If your plan is to copy paste and just change the school name, it's not going to make a huge impact, right? That's kind of like, you know, kind of a waste of your time and their time, right? So it's really important to really stick to like 20 schools. Any more than that is just a little too much and you're going to overwhelm yourself. And like, don't forget, like you're still going to have to report your like senior year grades, right? So like you don't want your senior year, like first semester grades to tank. That can actually be what helps you, right? Because that can be additional information that you submit of like, right, hey, look how great I'm doing this year with these, you know, AP class I'm taking or whatever it is. So it's very important to continue to prioritize your academics at school while also having the time to then come home, study for your classes, do your homework, but then also write some essays. Right. So that's really, really important. Another aspect of like narrowing your school list, I don't know if we're getting into this next, but a big part of it is also just go and tour these colleges, right? Tour the schools. Like that should be something that like you kind of, I'm not saying you have to tour all 20 schools, but like, especially a lot of the schools that like, you are just like, oh, I'm really excited about this. Or you're like, oh, you know what? Like, I'm not sure about this school. Go and check it out. Right. That's the best way to get like, for lack of a better word, but like the vibe of the school, right? Like, okay, like, does this match my energy kind of thing? Like that is the only way you can get that is not through Zoom. Like it's going to have to be in person. Right. And of course, like, like, let's say once you get admitted, you can always go for a second look a day, and like that's all great. But to really figure out like, oh, okay, like, this school I'm kind of on the fence about, go and tour it if you can, especially if it's near you, it's a drive. Go for a drive. Like, there's all through the summer, they'll have like, different days where they're doing admissions tours and like that kind of thing. Go and like check it out, right? And even if you can't get like go there on a day where there's an admissions tour happening, just go and like walk around and get a feel for the campus.
Right. The other thing too is universities and colleges are businesses. They are, for the most part, nonprofit. But what their marketing reflects and what the reality is are not always the same thing. And so, to Varna's earlier point about wanting to see, yourself represented in the student, staff, and faculty around you, marketing brochures are always going to be probably more diverse than what is actually happening. So taking a tour is a really good opportunity to see, the students here reflect the following demographics. One other thing that I think is important to think about when creating your list and kind of working to ensure balance is, again, doing that hard conversation and hard work early to think about finances. And so, for instance, if you are looking at a reach school, a school that you maybe have the least, strong chances of getting in, you probably also aren't going to get merit aid there. There's a strong likelihood versus a school where you might be above a certain threshold or in a higher percentile academically might offer you significantly more financial aid. So thinking about those things and kind of ensuring that you have balance when it comes to those more logistic factors will set you up for success. The other thing too is when you're thinking about scholarships in the future, that's another situation that you can use, or another like factor that you can use to narrow down your list, is looking at your major and the school that you're interested in and seeing what scholarship opportunities that they have, because often a lot of scholarships are considered at the time of admission and at the time of application. And so if you haven't thought about that and you really are relying on scholarships, or scholarships are a big portion of your college search, it won't be exciting at the end if the schools that you've chosen to apply to do not have a lot to offer in the way of scholarships. And you can find all that out well in advance. And you can find out, for a lot of them, what kind of students are being awarded them and what the profile of that student is, which might also help you benchmark kind of where you are with respect to that school.
Yeah. That actually also just reminded me of something I wanted to say earlier is, let's say you've taken a lot of AP or like IB courses, like looking at whether or not the school accepts them, right, is really, really huge, because one, you've been putting in all this work in high school to like take these harder classes. It would be awesome if that got you out of some of the introductory courses for within your major, right? And that also opens up space to take other exciting electives and whatever. Because I know it was like a huge thing. It was a huge bonus for me that like I had done up until like AP Spanish Lit in high school, and I think Michigan required like 4 semesters of Spanish, and I was able to like not have to do all those, and that opened up like 4 spaces to like do my double major. You know what I mean? Like, and that was honestly a huge reason why I was able to fit in the double major, right? Was because I was able to get out of that, and then like basic organic chemistry, or not organic chemistry, like whatever it's called, the physical chemistry.
You got to AP out of OChem. Good for you.
Yeah, right. Like, no, and that's a huge thing too, is like, like especially for some of these like STEM majors or whatever, like it's kind of helpful if you can get out of some of those introductory biochemistry classes, because sometimes those are like, the harder ones and they try to weed you out and whatever. So if you can use your AP credits to your advantage, that's also huge. But not every school is like that. So it's very, very important to also take a look at that. And that can all be found like literally in the school's curriculum.
Right. Yeah.
More on narrowing down your options. Okay, so when it comes to like how do you like gather this information, right? So one, going to the school website, right? Looking at the newspaper, the student newspaper, but then also even like the news section of like that school and what's going on is also important. And like I'm not just saying like, oh, like go to like the general school page, but like literally go to like admissions, and then like from there you can look at like student life, campus culture, like they'll have these separate tabs to like go through. Then if you also see opportunities of like, oh, like here's like a student, or here's like a faculty member that's like sits on this like student board or whatever, like you can straight up email and be like, hey, like I'm a prospective student, I'm interested in this school, like do you have like 10 minutes to talk on the phone about like opportunities in research or something like that, so be interactive. Like you don't have to just kind of passively look through websites and like look through like the top 25 list of schools or whatever. You can like very much like interact with that school, interact with their admissions, request the admissions person to connect you with this current student that is studying I don't know, like English or theater or whatever, arts. So I think that's really, really important. And then the touring, of course, like we mentioned. Anything else to add, Nick?
I was just going to say, it is 2024. I don't have TikTok, but I know the youth do. There are college influencers. I recently did a podcast with a guy that basically talks all about college at all times. And he has videos where he has gone on a college tour with a GoPro on so that you don't have to. And so, pop on YouTube and type in School A campus experience. And trust me, there are a lot of options. Yeah. But yeah, mostly what we've already talked about here. Same thing on this page. Don't be afraid to talk to your school counselors. A lot of the times, I know for my high school, my favorite teacher was our school counselor. So she sent people my email when they needed to learn about, the experiences at the colleges that I attended. Talk to current students, read the student newspaper. Again, that's going to give you the opinions column of any student newspaper is going to tell you more about the experience of that campus than almost anything. And also stay open to new ideas. You might think, oh, I really want to, go to a big state school. And then you might go to take a campus tour on a day that there is a football game or, some other event and learn that you actually hate being in a sea of people during a tailgate. So just stay flexible and take a look around. And then I see a few comments in the chat about reach and target safety and then a college decision matrix. We have a tool that basically will help with both of those things. Your quad counselor will be able to tell you what we feel is, a reach, a safety, a target. Really, it does start at the metrics, so the GPA, the test scores, but then it does carry on to what we've been talking about throughout this session, which is, are you really going to match the profile of the students that are there? Do you have the same priorities as the department? Because you're investing in college, but the college is also investing in you as students and, diverting resources. So really just making that case is what's going to help you differentiate between target and safety. And then also just with respect to the decision matrix, it really, I think, is super subjective because not everyone's priorities are the same. And so what's going to be the best for your student is kind of a moving target. But again, you can discuss that more with your counselor. Anything to add here, Varna?
No, that was everything. Perfect. So just to kind of wrap up, I know we probably sound like a broken record at this point, but identifying your non-negotiable characteristics, right? So that's where you have to start. And like, whether that means you take a blank sheet of paper and you put out, okay, here's everything that I must have. Here's everything that like, it's okay if they have or don't have, or here's everything that like, I don't really care about. I think that's really important as a starting point. And to make sure that like, if you're a parent on this call, make sure that like, you're not necessarily creating your list for colleges, right? It's really important that like it's what your student needs, right? What your child needs. That's what's really important here. What are their non-negotiables? Also, like once again, thinking about the environment, right? The environment is really, really important. Like what environment do you learn best in is like so important to key into and to reflect upon. And that might not be an answer that you're able to produce today, right? You might need to think about it for a few days of like, okay, like what, and in the past, when have I been like in a large group setting? Have I thrived in that? Or have I been, more with like more one-on-one attention? That's what I need, right? So very important to know that. And then really finding that balance, like I put in quotation marks here, safety schools, right? Dream target safety schools, or like reach target safety schools, whatever you want to call it. And like, I think that's a good point. Like it's really helpful to be realistic of like, okay, where do my metrics stand, right? And then from there, also talking about, okay, what other aspects, for example, like if it's a school that really does a whole lot of research and they really value that, they might value that in your own application, right? So if you have already done research as a high schooler, that is fantastic. And maybe that will be something that maybe even though your GPA is a little bit, off from their average, that can put you right over right? Because they see that you're, really putting yourself out there, trying new things. So don't necessarily like only look at like, oh, like I'm only going to apply if I'm meeting the metrics. But I think that it's a good way to differentiate between the three categories. And then start early. That's a really, really big one. It is great to see so many of you on here. That's great because, I mean, even though like senior year might seem like it's a little bit far away, it will creep right up on you. And like there's so many things that you are juggling. Like I am always blown away at how much like high schoolers are doing. And it is so hard to manage it all on top of then adding writing essays, especially if you're like, oh, like I'm not a huge like writer and I don't love writing essays. And writing a personal statement is so different from writing your AP Lang essay because we all have a very hard time of like talking about ourselves, and writing about yourself is like a whole different story. And being able to tell your story, I think that's one thing that like we don't. This is not the webinar for it. There's definitely going to be one.
I was going to say there is a follow-up that's all about that. So
yeah, that's all about the personal statement. Yeah, so definitely join in on the personal statement conversation because telling your story is like a huge, huge factor in the admissions process because that can be what really gets your foot in the door. So yeah, I think if there's anything else to add, Nick, go ahead. But otherwise, please throw in your questions. We have another like 8 minutes or so slotted out.
Yeah.
Hello.
You covered everything on that page that I was going to talk about. So
I think on behalf of our audience, I'd love to say that both of you are complete geniuses. So thank you very much for all of that. And yes, wonderful audience. We'd love to hear from you. Please feel free to drop in your questions. As well, you see a QR code on the screen. We highly recommend you take out your phones and give that a quick scan. It actually leads you to a page where you can sign up for a free consultation with our team of experts. It's, I think 20-30 minutes. You really get to sit down with an expert. You can discuss your background, your goals. You can share your current college admissions sort of stats and what you're thinking. We can discuss how our program is actually built, and then any questions that you may have around the college application process, including questions about specific schools or sort of your students' current situations. We highly encourage you to take advantage of that resource.
And I saw in the chat just a few questions about even starting to find colleges and narrow things down. And Andrea dropped in all the great quad resources. I'm going to sound like a huge nerd by talking about this, but the National Center for Education Statistics does mandate that all colleges and universities that are accredited in the United States report a lot of information. And so you can go to that lovely IPEDS website. IPEDS is the Integrated Post-Secondary Education Data System. And you can look at the schools that you're interested in, or you can download an Excel sheet of all schools that exist and then start sorting by things like average SAT score, average high school GPA. You can even look at things like racial demographics. So, what percentage of a school is white? What percentage of a school is men? And if you have certain thresholds that you're looking for based on, wanting to be in community with, people that look like you, you can filter for that by looking at their data. You can also see things like research funding, athletics, a whole host of things. And because schools are legally required to report that information, it's a lot.
Absolutely. And I think I just did a quick browse. I popped this open and yes, absolutely. And if parents are going through this and they're a little bit overwhelmed and you'd like some extra assistance in filtering through all of that, please don't hesitate to reach out to our team as well. But I think one big thing is just bit by bit, right? If there's anything that we've gotten from this presentation is also small steps, right?
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. So,
and I just dropped another in the chat as well, which is to the National Student Clearinghouse, and they are another national nonprofit entity that collects verification data and a whole host of other things on colleges. So if you have like questions that you're trying to answer and you're like, I don't know where to find this information, that is another great public resource as well.
Absolutely. And we aren't actually affiliated with any of these resources. These are just genuine resources.
Yeah, these are governmental bodies. So.
Yes. Not associated. I want to just make that clear. So somebody just asked, what is the website? Could you put it in the chat? Yes. Okay. So there's a chat option. You should see it. It should be next to your Q&A. And I've gone ahead and I've actually highlighted so they show up in pink on my end. I apologize. I don't know what color they'd be on
Yeah,
the other
they're
end. They're pink. Fantastic. So we have a link to the podcast Nick was actually on. I have that in there. We have a college selection quiz, a directory and database, which has a lot. We have the iPads. I probably just butchered that. We have that website. We have a university website as well as Student Clearinghouse. So you should see that in there.
Mhm.
You're very, very welcome. Again, I want to be mindful of time, so I'd love to see if anybody has any additional questions. We have about 2 to 3 minutes.
And if you want to hear me talk for longer, that video is 30 minutes of basically starting the application process.
It's a fantastic podcast.
That's awesome.
It's absolutely fantastic. You're very welcome. It doesn't look like we have any other questions. However, we do have tons of kudos for you, Varna and Nick. So thank you both very much. To our audience, thank you for being present with us tonight. We hope that you learned a lot, and please don't hesitate to reach out. Questions, comments, concerns, or if you need more guidance on this. And of course, please keep an eye out on the website for a follow-up to this particular webinar. Awesome. Have a great night, everyone.